Now, it's the 1st of February and a new month starts with potentially some good news. The Times newspaper report that Britain and the EU have struck a deal that could resolve the issue of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which places a border down the Irish Sea. The Times understands that Brussels has accepted a proposal that would avoid the need for routine checks on products destined for the province. Alongside this, the EU has reportedly conceded for the first time that the European Court of Justice could rule on issues relating to the province only if a case was referred to by the Northern Irish courts. Previously, Brussels had insisted the European Commission should be able to take cases straight to the court. An insider has said the EU has moved a lot from its original position. This deal won't delight anyone, but the hope is it will satisfy enough people. EU sources have played down these claims and simply said it's not true. Well, there you go. Does this possible deal satisfy one of the most high-profile Brexiteers in the country, the Conservative MP for North East Somerset, and GBNews' very own Jacob Rees Mogg? Hello, Jacob.
Hello, good evening.
Is this potentially good news? Is this a game changer or fool's gold?
The devil will be in the detail, as always. So you get a headline saying they're close to an agreement, but what have they agreed? And the European Court is a symptom rather than the actuality of the problem. What it's about is, does EU law apply in Northern Ireland? And if it does, is that acceptable to the unionist community, particularly as represented by the DUP? And that's the DUP's biggest concern. They think that Northern Ireland democracy outside the European Union should not have laws imposed upon it that are then ultimately, even if by second degree, ruled upon by a court outside the United Kingdom. And from what you read out, it doesn't sound as if they've got there. If the DUP doesn't support it, then power sharing won't come back. If power sharing doesn't come back, then this deal doesn't really help.
Indeed, the DUP have their 7 tests for the resolution of this issue. A source speaking to the Times suggests that it could be fulfilled, that the DUP will accept this deal. Do you think there's a chance they will?
Well, as I say, it depends on the detail of what is in it. But the key for the DUP is that EU law doesn't apply in Northern Ireland without any democratic oversight of the people of Northern Ireland, and that the United Kingdom remains intact, and that goods can go freely from GB to Northern Ireland that are not in any question of going into the single market.
Yeah.
I personally think it would be better to proceed with the bill that is before the House of Lords, which would provide a solution to this, would provide a green lane for all goods going into Northern Ireland from GB that are not likely to be sent on to the Republic.
Yes, indeed, although at the moment Brussels don't seem to be willing to go that far. It looks like, going into some of the detail, the UK government have negotiated a system here, if it happens, of green and red lanes. So goods testing for Northern Ireland will be allowed. Goods coming into Northern Ireland will be allowed without routine checks. Goods going for onward export to the Republic would face customs formalities in Northern Irish ports. Now, that gets rid of the hated border down the Irish Sea, doesn't it?
Well, routine checks or non-routine checks between goods that are going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland that won't go on to the Republic is still quite an issue, because if goods go from Somerset to Wiltshire, they don't get subject to checks, do they? And is Northern Ireland fully part of the United Kingdom, or isn't it? That is the fundamental issue which the unionists will have to be satisfied by.
How urgent is a resolution of this issue?
I think it's very pressing, because the union is a constitutional union, but it's also an economic union. And it's crucial that the economy of Northern Ireland is not harmed by the Northern Ireland Protocol.
And of course, by possibly digging their heels in on this, Brussels risk restarting the Troubles, because there are great tensions in Northern Ireland within the unionist community about what's happening.
Well, that's very important that you make this point, because the protocol accepts that the Good Friday Belfast Agreement is superior to it. And therefore anything that risks that means that the protocol can be overridden, and that is within the text of the protocol, which was itself meant to be temporary. And that's why there is a strong legal argument in favour, in international law, of passing the bill that is before Parliament.
Notwithstanding the detail of this, and you're right, the devil is in it, do you detect that the mood music is changing on both sides now? Do you feel that there is momentum behind a resolution?
Well, it's encouraging that people are having these discussions, but as far as I'm aware, Mr. Šefčovič's mandate from the European Union to negotiate has not been changed. And until that is changed, how can you come to a conclusion? So there may be positive signs, maybe a little glimmer of optimism, but I wouldn't be running up the flags yet.
Staying on Brexit, but indirectly, a gloomy economic outlook from the IMF announced yesterday. Lots of different factors, including our exposure to gas prices. Of course, we've got inflation, lots of other issues. But Brexit came up. Do you think that, the challenges we have economically are in any way related to it?
Slightly less noticed in the IMF's figures was that they actually upgraded the growth that they had expected for 2022, and they have got their forecasts for the UK economy wrong every single year since 2016, and always they've been too gloomy. So I wouldn't back IMF forecasts. They're not really very valuable. Does the UK economy face headwinds? Yes, of course it does. Interest rates are rising. There is a difficult global background. But in 2021 and 2022, the UK economy grew faster than almost all other major economies. We were actually really rather strong. So we grew faster than the US, than Germany, than France, much faster than Japan. So I wouldn't be too gloomy, and I wouldn't take the IMF's forecasts as gospel.
Therefore, are you more optimistic about the year ahead economically for the country?
There are some good signs that inflation may be peaking, and therefore the rate of rise of interest rates is likely to have peaked and may even by the end of the year begin to reverse, that the government's tax revenues are shooting up, partly because of fiscal drag caused by the inflation, so there may be some flexibility within the Treasury for the long hoped for tax cuts. So yes, things could be beginning to perk up, and other countries' economies are picking up a bit too.
Do you think the Chancellor and the Prime Minister will move on tax cuts this year?
I think it's going to be difficult for them to, because they set their stall out so clearly as being in favour of higher taxation in the autumn statement. Now, I happen to think that we need to reduce both taxes and public expenditure, that the state has got too big, but you do need to do both sides of it.
So if you were Prime Minister, you would be reducing taxes at this point?
Well, I certainly wouldn't be in favour, I never have been in favour, of the increase in corporation tax. I've always thought that was a mistake.
Will the taxes that are in place, which of course are approaching the highest level since the war, are they going to dent economic growth? Could they provoke a recession?
Well, taxation always dents economic growth because, broadly speaking, individuals spend their own money better than the government spends it for them. You have to have some level of taxation to pay for the public services that people want. So there's a balance to be found, but do I think that the highest tax rate of 70 years is the right balance? No, I don't. We need to get back to low rates of taxation within the economy.
What's your message to the public sector workers on strike today? Lecturers, teachers, bus drivers, rail workers, many thousands of people have downed tools. What would you say to them, particularly those who are going to food banks to make ends meet and to survive?
I would encourage them to get back to work, that the effect they are having, particularly teachers going on strike, on people who earn less than they do, is serious. Some people earning less than teachers have had to give up a day's pay to look after their children. That this is a very selfish thing to be doing. New pay rounds will be beginning for 2023. Inflation has now come through the system, whereas when the pay rounds were first being discussed last year, we hadn't reached the peak of inflation. So I think it should be in this year's discussion rather than a retrospective look at last year's discussion where the answer needs to be found.
Do you support Rishi Sunak's approach to the industrial policy at the moment and how he's approaching these strikes?
Yes, I think he's doing the right thing. I don't think he can possibly give in to these demands for pay increases, which would in and of themselves be inflationary because they would lead to more government borrowing, which would be a fiscal stimulus that the state can't afford.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, can't wait for the news show.
I'm looking forward to it.
So much anticipation.
I'll have to interview on my show.
I'd be honoured. I'd love to be grilled by Rees-Mogg, I've got to say. You're a hero to many of our viewers, and we look forward to the show, which is, of course, appearing on your screens imminently.